Welcome to this episode of The Good, the Bad, and the One Out. We're your host, Mark. I have a guest on this one, Mike from Chinstroker versus Punter, who's a big Twin Peaks fan, and we'll be going through the pilot and season 1 of Twin Peaks. Hi, Mike.
Well, thanks for having me on. Looking forward to talking some Twin Peaks. It's weird actually because I don't think on Chinstroker versus Punter we've ever actually done an out-and-out Twin Peaks episode, but it's something that we've talked about a lot in reference to a lot of other stuff. So it'd be quite nice to actually, get down to a bit of the nitty-gritty with Twin Peaks for a change.
Yeah, I do remember you telling me once. I think it was on Facebook. You mentioned that or it might have been when we did one of our previous recording, that you actually did have a phone interview with I've got Mark Frost. Did it?
Yeah.
You lost it, yeah.
Yeah, no. That's on our feed. We had him on about 2 years ago.
Right. Nice.
And that's on there. No, the one that we lost, we did an interview with Ray Wise.
Ray Wise, oh man.
And that was a victim of choreograph. When I listened back, it only recorded half the conversation. But we did, about 3 or 4 years ago, we had Michael Anderson on. And about 2 years ago, we had Mark Frost on. And they're both in our archives.
Nice.
They're out there on the internet.
I actually watched, as in prep for this, I watched one of the extras on the original American box set of Twin Peaks season 1, and he does a phone interview with a couple of guys from, what are they called?
Wrapped in Plastic.
Yes, Wrapped in Plastic, and he struck me as a really good interview.
Yeah, well, he's very approachable as well. I literally just tweeted him and said, would you come on our podcast? And he gave me he didn't have Skype, so he gave me his home telephone number.
Wow.
And I phoned him, and we just talked for like 2 hours on like a Tuesday night. He was just really supportive and just really appreciative that that people were still interested in the show. And he was like, "No, I love talking about it." So it was very refreshing, considering that a lot of the time you have to fight your way through handlers and agents to get to people. When 9 times out of 10, if you can just get a direct line to them, they're happy to go and talk to somebody who is asking them questions that perhaps they haven't been asked a million times by Entertainment Weekly or whoever.
Yeah, I mean, he was. I mean, the Wrapped in Plastic guys were like they were faffing about a bit, but he just, he got cut to the core of what they were really asking and explained it really well. So I was really impressed by him, actually, just watching that little interview. He described in it, he saw Cooper as like a modern version of Sherlock Holmes, with a bit more, intuitiveness rather than logic. Yeah, but I essentially saw it as a modern take on Sherlock Holmes, which is kind of interesting. Okay, let's get on to the pilot. Now, I didn't even realise this, but on IMDb, it's got an alternative name, Northwest Passage, which I wasn't aware of. And I love Twin Peaks, and I've watched it several times. Was not aware that the pilot was also had a subtitle name, Northwest Passage.
It's kind of the thing is, the story behind that is that it has and it hasn't. I mean, none of the original episodes of Twin Peaks ever actually had episode titles, but if you look on IMDb or Wikipedia, they've all been assigned these titles. Now, the way that came about was that the episodes just had, like, the pilot was just called Pilot. The first episode was like 1X01. They were just designated with sort of technical titles for people to edit them. And it wasn't until they were released on Laserdisc in Japan. And it was like the first time they actually had a decent home video release. This was like in about 94, 95. Yeah. And they were assigned titles, but all the hour-long episodes were assigned titles that were just made up by the people who did the Laserdiscs for those. And they've sort of stuck. Now, the Northwest Passage, I mean, that was the original name of the show when they were writing it before they came up with the name of Twin Peaks. Right. And because they needed something for Lynch Frost Productions, or what remains of them, were approached years after the fact saying, we need these shows are going into syndication. We need episode titles for them all, for the TV guides, because that's just the format. You have the show, the name of the episode, whether it's a repeat, whether it's got closed captions, these sort of details that they have to have on them. And somebody in Lynch Frost Group just went, just call the pilot Northwest Passage, just so you've got something to put on those.
Okay.
But it was never actually the intention for that to be the name of that episode. It just got assigned to it through kind of sheer practicality, I guess.
Yeah, I think I was under the impression it was something to do with the German release, but I'm sure you're correct. I mean, that's from distant memory. I was never quite sure. For this, I mean, we're talking about this really because the entire mystery box set has come out, I guess, and that's the reason I decided to rewatch it. I watched the full thing about 2 or 3 years ago, and then I watched series 1 about a year ago, but didn't carry on at that point. But I've decided I'm going to watch it all again. Have you had a chance to look at the box set much?
Yeah, I suppose I've got to put it into context, really. I mean, I watched the show when it was first on. I think I was like 16, so I was the perfect age for it. I really got into it in a kind of, cult TV kind of way, and, I obsessed over all the details and, discussed all of the theories in the sort of, the prototype Lost sort of fashion, I guess.
Yeah.
Had the VHSs, which are renowned for being one of the worst transfers of a TV show in history, to the point where we kind of joke on our podcast that the only home video release that was available in the UK was the CBS video versions, which didn't include the pilot. There's always been weird legality when it comes to the rights of the pilot. Sometimes some various sets of the first season include it, others don't, for reasons that I won't bore you with. But the VHSs were such awful quality that for, I think, a whole generation of Twin Peaks fans, that almost kind of strangely became part of the aesthetic of the show. They were so bleached out and the colours were so awful that when it was first released on DVD, and the DVD release was very strange. It was, as you alluded to, it was released in the States without a pilot for a long period of time. Then the first season got released in the UK with the pilot. Then the second season came out, and then there was the gold set, which was essentially a re-release of both seasons on DVD, but unfortunately without any of the commentaries, but with additional bonus features, additional behind-the-scenes documentaries, some of which had involvement from it, some of which didn't. And then there was the first HD remaster was for Netflix, was done for streaming. and for I think CBS Action, the American sort of repeats network, had the same HD remaster done, and then it was remastered again for Blu-ray, and then the Blu-ray, included some additional bonus features, most notably Fire Walk With Me, a new remaster, and of course, the deleted materials that people have been, have had an almost kind of folklore built up around in the last 25 years since Fire Walk With Me came out. So I mean, I have, the short answer is I've had a look at the Blues, but the remasters and the Blues weren't a massive revelation to me, because, as I say, I'd already seen the first HD remaster pass that they've done on them for Netflix. But I've had a little. The only bonus materials I've got to at this point are the Fire Walk With Me deleted scenes, but I'll be getting to the rest of them. But I've done a rewatch of most of the first season on the Blues. But to be honest with you, Twin Peaks is one of those shows where I've seen it so many times. I don't necessarily feel compelled to do a rewatch to discuss it on a podcast, because I've kind of got it. I've got it on sort of memory tap. To be honest with you,
I think I'm kind of at the same, not quite the same level, but similar in the. Every minute of every episode, there wasn't a bit where I thought, I don't remember that bit at all. Sometimes the ordering seems like I don't remember it being in that order, but essentially I remember every scene and sort of line of dialogue. I
think for most people, there's a run of episodes in the second season that are probably the ones that I've rewatched the least.
Yeah.
But at the same time, even those, I mean, generally speaking, it's not like Star Trek or The Twilight Zone or one of these shows where I'll just cherry pick the odd episode and think, I'm going to watch this episode of Twin Peaks. Most of the viewings of it that I've had have been a complete rewatch. I mean, the most recent time I watched it was me, Dude Foz, and his Mark Foster from Dude the Monkey, and his wife Becky went to a screening of the whole series in Battersea.
Battersea. Yeah.
And it was like a 30-hour screening in a hall with no chairs.
The Twin Peaks Festival, was it?
Yeah, no, it wasn't the festival.
Wasn't it?
It was called the I can't remember. It was like the just the Lynch Marathon or something like that. I mean, I know what you mean. There is the UK Lynch Twin Peaks Festival as well, which actually started around the same time. I think there was like this screening, and then like the next month there was a festival, and they have done the entire mystery screening as well. But this was a separate event. But it was as grueling as it was entertaining.
Yeah, I think I was aware you were at that. So I was a listener of Chinstroker versus Punter at that time, sort of following you either on Palaver or Facebook, whichever it was back then.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably going back 3 or 4 years, I think, maybe.
I'm sure. Yeah, I do remember you being aware you were at him, being kind of jealous, but thinking, I'm not sure I could. I'd certainly know off the top of my head which episodes I try and sleep through.
Well, it was funny actually, because it was. I mean, I didn't make it through the whole thing. I never intended to make it through the whole thing. Okay. But it was. I mean, the most entertaining elements of it were. It was. I can't remember what the venue was, but it was an old theatre building, and there was a lot of other things going on as well. Like, wherever you went, there was the Badalamenti music playing. They'd deck the place out. They'd put the red curtains up. They'd put the sort of white and black checkered floor on. There was. There was like musical, there was bands playing, there was a lot of other stuff going on as well. So it was one of those things where we got there, we got our spot. There was a break between the first and the second series, which is when we hit the booze, which I think probably had a lot to do with that. And it started at like 11 o'clock the one day and went through until sort of 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon the next day.
Right.
And it was. I started to doze off around the time that James leaves Twin Peaks.
Right.
And so after the sort of the Laura Leland storyline's been completed,
right.
And I think we actually left completely about 2 or 3 episodes after that. But we had a pretty good run. I mean, we certainly made it through the core story arc.
Yeah. Actually, I used to live. I was raised near Battersea. I sort of know it quite well. I'm guessing it's the Battersea Arts Centre.
It was, yeah.
Okay. Right. Okay. It kind of sounds fun, but 30 hours is a bit daunting, frankly. It really is. Okay, back onto the pilot then. So, I watched the original pilot, which I've seen several times, and I watched the international version, which I've only seen once before. No, I'm telling a lie. I didn't watch it all the way through. I watched the section where they diverge, because they're pretty much the same thing except for the last sort of 2 minutes of the original, or 3 minutes of the last 2 minutes of the original, and then 15 minutes extra on the international version. And it's interesting, I didn't realise this, listening to some of the audio commentaries, I didn't know that they didn't intend to use that footage, or there wasn't an intention of using that footage at the end of the international version in the Red Room in the series. It's just the Red Room was an idea all on its own. That's the impression I got from the audio commentary, which I wasn't aware of.
Because I remember it was always called the European version when it first came out, and I remember because I first heard about that when I watched the pilot, the aired version, same as everybody else. And I got into the show, and there was a little bit of merchandising for the show when it came out. There was the CD soundtrack, which was kind of a big seller in its own right, really. And I remember going into W.H. Smith's and seeing the video cassette Twin Peaks. And there was a sticker on the front of it saying, "Find out who the killer is." And I'm like, well, that's a bit strange. Like, the show's only been on the air for a few weeks. And I took it home, and it ended up being this European version where, a lot of the backers, when they sold the show, there was this kind of like quirk to the contract that, in order to recoup any of the money, because, it was shot on 35mm. It had the production value of a film. There was a lot of location. I mean, obviously we'll get into this talking about the pilot, but there was a lot more location shooting than you ordinarily get on a network TV pilot. And so the idea being that if the show didn't go to series, or if it was considered a disaster, David Lynch had a certain amount of kind of cash as a director in Europe. So the logic was that they could tack on this ending of sorts in order to be able to perhaps give it a theatrical release. Now, that never happened, but the result of that was that a different, I think it was Warner Brothers, ended up having the rights to this. So they thought, well, we can capitalise on this now that the series is being successful. So they released this somewhat baffling version of it. And no way of us saying this without name dropping, but when we had Michael Anderson on the podcast, he basically said that he got a phone call from Lynch, and they'd just gone back to Los Angeles from Seattle, and he was like, "Look, I need you to come and do something." And basically, the whole of the Red Room sequence was essentially improvised, and at the time, Lynch was very, very into this idea of, whenever you see any interviews with Lynch, I mean, even now, but particularly around the late 80s, early 90s, he was obsessed with the concept of the question of where ideas come from. This theory that they come out of the ether? Do they, an idea is something that isn't there one moment and then is there the other. So he was very interested in that kind of idea. I don't know, but I think it was connected as well to transcendental meditation, which is something that he's always been very interested in. So I think what seemed to happen was that this unlocked an idea. There was some moments of coincidence. The famous story about Silver, who would play Frank Silver, who played Killer Bob, was accidentally reflected in the mirror during a scene with Sarah Palmer. So Lynch saw that was the universe's way of telling him that this meant something, and the unpacking of this idea, which David Lynch always said that the central tenet of Twin Peaks, one of the central tenets of Twin Peaks that he discovered when they were shooting on this little soundstage in LA, doing this Red Room sequence, was the line of dialogue that he gives to Cooper in the third episode, where they repurpose this, is the idea of crack the code and solve the crime. And the idea being is that there's this greater consciousness, or the answer to every question is there in our minds. We just need to unlock it by having the right set of circumstances come together in order to make these ideas which already exist in our brains come to the forward in our consciousness. And I think that was what he was. It's kind of a meta thing in the way that's what Cooper's doing, but that's also what the audience are doing, and that's also what David Lynch and Mark Frost, as the writers of the show, are doing. Is they've got this moment of extreme surrealism, and over the course of the series, the characters, the writers, and the audiences are kind of unpacking, this sort of the subconscious elements of what's going in here, but trying to give it some literal narrative meaning as well.
Yeah, to sort of expand on, add to what you said about his sort of theories on, his approach to ideas. in one of the extras, the lady that plays the log lady talks about, David Lynch, and she's of it. Pretty much everyone in all of the commentaries you talk to obviously really love being part of Twin Peaks or working with David Lynch. But she mentions how David Lynch mentioning she mentioned she knows that when he first thought of the Red Room, he could not sleep. He was so excited about the idea, which it just came to him. And he mentions another thing where when he sees that shot with Frank Silva, I think it's the one at the end of the bed, or through the bed set, he actually just shouts "perfect." And that then becomes part of the lore of Twin Peaks. He sees these things, he gets these images, and they have to be part of it. It doesn't matter if they're not narratively incoherent, or they'll work it out. And I think Mark Frost brings that binding to it. That's what Mark Frost brings. But
that yin and yang between the two of them. I mean, the fact really that it almost feels as though David Lynch is like this chaotic figure, like the Joker or something, who will just drop down for an episode every season, or a couple of episodes every season, and kind of give the show its kind of aesthetic direction, its tonal direction, but also will kind of just drop down this insanity and then step back and allow the more conventional, seasoned, professional television writers assign logic and narrative to that.
Yeah, I think. To me, again, listen to all the commentaries. It seems like the pilot sets the tone in that it was a 35mm, and I think at least one of the directors in series 1 saw the pilot at a proper screening in the Directors Guild Theatre, and he was so impressed by it that just by osmosis, almost the tone, the palette, the shooting style of the series is kind of set by that. By Lynch in that pilot. Some of the stories about Lynch just make me laugh. Though Cheryl Lee talks about how she feels like you can play with David Lynch. He'll just. And they also several of the actors mentioned they never auditioned, they never read lines. They just went for meetings and talked to David Lynch. Cheryl Lee says, within 10 minutes of meeting him, she said, "How do you feel about being wrapped naked in plastic?" It's like, she's sure, fine. It's kind of things like that. Lynch just seems awesome when you hear about. He's obviously an artist compared to not an artisan, and his artistry really sort of makes its mark in this series, and I think Mark Frost does his bit for bringing the coherency, and just like you say, the yin and yang just makes it work so well. It really does. One thing, David, there was a note Carl McLaughlin mentions where he was getting direction from David Lynch, and I was always really interested how David Lynch, directs, his actors, and he says, Carl McLaughlin says he just said to me, a little more Elvis. That's the kind of way he does his direction, which just makes me laugh. So I rewatched the pilot, as I say, and the extra. It was interesting because I've heard this story about the mirror, and I tried to see the shot, and I did notice it. It's actually in the European version. Well, when Sarah's Palmer's screaming, you can actually see it's almost like a mirror with a face in it, but you can't quite see the face. And I'd never noticed that before, so it was interesting to see that. I thought that was kind of cool.
Well, Lynch seemed to find some sort of symbolic meaning in it. It's funny because it's always unusual going back and watching pilots as well. Even for a show that ran for only 2 seasons. But you can see that because the series itself wasn't filmed on location. They used the establishing shots that they got in Snoqualmie, but the show was shot in LA. Whenever you see characters shivering by the lake, they're actually sweating by the lake in LA somewhere.
Yeah.
And they do a good job of that. But at the same time, for example, the interior of the Great Northern looks different because in the pilot it's a real hotel. The inside of the sheriff's office, the high school, the diner, they all look very different. But at the same time, the sets that they would have in the TV series were trying to replicate that. But I think that the thing is that we talk about Lynch as sort of auteur and everything is he's one of those people who he pops overground every so often and then kind of scuttles back underground. I think my feeling is now he's firmly underground again. I mean, to the point where he's really semi-retired as a filmmaker. But I mean, it's interesting to think. One thing I always have to bring up when it comes to talking about Twin Peaks is to look at this in the context of, it was shot in the late 80s, aired in 1990. I mean, television then was Dallas. It's very easy for people to forget, that this was so-called golden age of television. It was X-Files. It was pre-24. It was before the rise of HBO. Certainly HBO as an outlet for sort of cinematic grade dramatic television. So it's you have to kind of put your context goggles on a little bit, I think, when watching this, because I'd never seen anything like this. I mean, the show would get weirder. I mean, there's certainly that moment in the third episode, but in the pilot, when it starts, it's not outwardly surreal. Everything's just kind of at 11. I mean, when you open up, it's all very somber, but you've got something isn't quite right, and you've got that feeling of everything is so raw and real, whether that be Andy, the deputy Andy crying, whether that be the fact that the camera holds on Sarah Palmer crying just that little bit longer than a normal TV show would. It takes the dramatic into the absurd and makes it kind of awkwardly comedic. And it was one of those things where watching it as a second-year-old, I just got it straight away. I mean, I was 10 minutes in and I was like, wow, okay, I can see what they're trying to do here. I knew a little bit about David Lynch. I'd seen Blue Velvet and I'd seen Dune at this point. I'd seen The Elephant Man, but I don't think I'd ever connected that in my mind as being a David Lynch film. I think a lot of people don't, to be honest. But people talk about the weirdness of Twin Peaks, and a lot of that is, the cliche is, the talking dwarf, the dwarf talking backwards and dancing has almost become a visual, because of The Simpsons and a lot of parodies, has become almost like a visual shortcut for surrealism. But in the pilot, it's not as obvious. It's just there's a slowness. There's moments. The example I always use to sum up the tone of the pilot. And how it's established is a really small moment where Dr. Jacoby gets out of the lift and he's got the different coloured glasses on and the corks in his ear, and he's just being weird at Cooper and Truman, and he walks off and Cooper just turns around and he's like, that guy's a psychiatrist, and Truman's like, yeah, and they just carry on walking. And there's another moment around there as well where Cooper will just shift tone. He'll be like, right, tell me about these incredible trees that you've got here. And Truman will be like, Douglas firs. And Cooper will be having this kind of local hero moment. He's like, Douglas fir. and then he's like, I need to have the toxicology reports from and those shifts where somebody who wasn't locked into it, like I can imagine maybe like, my parents watching it at the time would be like, well, this is just stupid. 1 minute he's doing this, whereas, but if you were the right, I don't know whether it's the right age or the right sensibility, that very subtly left of centre vibe, I think is tremendously appealing, and it's there from the outset, but it's not, all the UFOs and the Black Lodge and all that stuff, that came a lot later. In the pilot, everything's kind of real, but there's just this slight gauze over it.
It's to me, I think there's two things that sort of make it appealing. It's the look and feel, just the look, the look of how it looks, without actors or anything like that. There's just the sheer look and feel, the color palettes. They're just completely different from anything. I think the most revolutionary thing in TV before this was probably Miami Vice. That really did stick out as like being a very stylized kind of thing. But this was something else. This was almost like you were watching art on TV rather than a TV show. There was that, and also as you say, there's this slightly odd edge to it. You've described a few things, but I also think some of the acting. It was almost hyper-real acting, which watching back, I don't notice as much. I think it doesn't stick out to me as much, I think, as I saw it when the first or second time I saw it, as feeling very stylized. Sometimes with like old Japanese cinema, like Seven Samurai, stuff like that, the acting styles of a stylized kind of acting that we're not used to, and it kind of, it doesn't feel unrealistic. It just feels different. And I think Twin Peaks has got that.
A moment I was thinking, well, there's two moments in one scene as well where they go in to see Laura's body, and just the fact that the overhead lighting's slightly broken.
Yeah.
And somebody comments on it. And I can't remember the guy's name, but Cooper says to him, turns around to a guy and says, "Can we be left alone for a minute?" And the guy goes, "Phil." And he's like, no, can we be left alone for a minute? He's like, "Oh, sorry." I mean, and I think that was the first time that I'd ever, in a TV show, seen a character mishear something for no reason. Usually when that happens in a TV show, it's because there's some plot element related to it. You've got it results in a misunderstanding which drives the story. But just something as simple as a character mishearing and answering incorrectly, then realizing that they've misheard something and correcting themselves, was a quietly revolutionary thing to do on a TV show.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes from he sees things, he hears things, something strikes him as odd, and he puts it into the show, and I think the writers will then feed on that. Sort of, if someone tells me, we'll come on to it, but what the stuff with the cherry stem, and Audrey, I think it's episode 4, so that's a story told to a writer who was already involved with the show and thought, well, that's how I can sort of show something about Audrey that's kind of odd and different. But
it was the directors of the later of other episodes, basically the non-Lynch directors, trying to emulate the style of David Lynch that resulted in the phrase Lynchian.
Yes.
The fact that when you have an auteur who's got a style that's so precise and clear and identifiable and signature, that other directors can come in and plug into that in the same way that, a sitcom director would come in and, plug into that, I think kind of says a lot about that. And also, I mean, you were talking a moment ago about the sort of the things that elevated this as a TV show at the time. Just the fact that it was a movie director doing television, and we'd see, not long after it, a lot of things that would try and emulate this, like Oliver Stone doing Wild Palms. And I think, if anything, I mean, I would say that there's 5 or 6 specific things I could say that Twin Peaks was very influential on that we're still seeing the effects of. But I think one of those things was taking television out of the sort of the ghetto as far as directors go. The idea being that, the idea, for example, in the early 90s of somebody like Kiefer Sutherland or James Spader doing a TV show would have seemed ridiculous, back then. And I think that one of the things that's very easy to forget and to lose from a contextual point of view is the fact that people were just thought, why is this movie director slumming it on television?
Yeah. It was those walls are broken down now. I was reading something today about how screenwriters now see television as the go-to place now. Films are not the place to work your craft for a screenwriter. It's TV, and I see Twin Peaks as the start of it all. I know they've got no movie stars. I mean, I guess Kyle MacLachlan just about was known to some people, but not really. But Twin Peaks I see as the start of the whole change in TV. I think you mentioned.
The music as well, I think, is a big part of that too. The fact that I think on a lot of TV shows, on network TV, particularly in the 80s and the early 90s, there were like 4 or 5 composers who did everything. You had people like Pete Carpenter, Mike Post. You had all these people who Bill Conti, who did everything. And it was almost a genre in itself, TV music. I mean, you kind of see that a little bit now with, your CSIs, and I mean, they joke about that in Forgetting Sarah Marshall, the ominous minor chords on the keyboard that are just the sort of the music bed of all TV shows. The idea of having rockabilly and jazz and genres which you wouldn't assume. And again, Badalamenti, who was a theatrical, his main gigs, aside from working for David Lynch, where he did a lot of stuff with Jeunet. He was a film composer, and largely, he was the guy who ran the music department for the Olympics. He wasn't somebody that you'd normally view in that. And I think that just all of this sort of sensibility and this logic. Because, I mean, David Lynch didn't know how to make television. He'd never made television before. I mean, he barely understood how to make films. I mean, this guy he's a photographer and artist who kind of fell into making films because it was just the only way he could make a living with the skills that he had. So I don't think that Lynch ever went in to try and subvert anything. I don't think his intention was to satire anything, really, not consciously at least, or to change anything. I think it was just that's how he thought television was made.
Yeah, I just it's hard watching Lynch's film to think he's just doing. I don't know. I'm trying to think. I mean, what's your favourite Lynch film?
Probably Blue Velvet, because I feel that's his most complete film from an auteur point of view.
Yeah,
I think if you want to show somebody what David Lynch does, both from a sort of audio visual, but also from a kind of thematic predilection point of view, that's the one to go to. Whereas, I mean, it's kind of like to have a music analogy, that most great bands have got that one album that you can point to. You like tracks on their other albums, but they've got that one album that kind of communicates everything that they do. And, there's other films I probably like as much as that, and I've seen as many times as that, but to me there's something very central about Blue Velvet.
Yeah, I have to say, I think for me, I really, really like Eraserhead. Every time I see it, I enjoy it more. But I think Blue Velvet's really wonderful. And Fire Walk with Me, actually, those three to me are my top three. I like a lot of his films.
It's funny actually, because I think that, because I'm a big David Lynch fan, I think the only real insight I can give personally about about David Lynch and what his films mean to me is to kind of look at what doesn't work for me. And I mean, the only one of his films that I out and out dislike is Mulholland Drive. And that's because, and this is interesting because this gets back to what we were talking about with the international version of the pilot episode of Twin Peaks, that's essentially what Mulholland Drive was. Mulholland Drive was made to be the pilot episode of a TV series. The series got pulled after the pilot was viewed and was deemed just too weird for network television. And Lynch was given money by I think it was CB2000, it was a French company, to make an ending for it and release it theatrically. And I feel that personally, that shows with Mulholland Drive, whereas a lot of the obtuse sort of surrealism of Lynch, I feel is intentional, and I think is designed for us to interpret in our own ways or just to enjoy on a kind of primal level. But Mulholland Drive to me looks like a 90-minute pilot episode with a load of bollocks on the end, most of which was stolen from Lost Highway, story-wise, and in order to make it function as a film. And I think that feeling is exacerbated by the fact that Lost Highway was attacked upon release because it came out during the David Lynch backlash when everybody was like, yeah, we're sick of that guy, let's tear him down. Whereas Mulholland Drive came out a few years later when I think cooler heads had prevailed and everybody embraced it as this wonderful comeback, when I feel that, to me, it was a lesser version of Lost Highway, and it was kind of cobbled together. Whereas the cobbled together version of the Twin Peaks pilot, I kind of accept for what it is because it was never intended to be anything more than that, and can be viewed as a sort of curiosity. But Mulholland Drive to me has always felt like it's the only time I've ever felt that David Lynch was kind of bullshitting a little bit, and that the weirdness was there as a way of disguising the fact that they didn't have any closure for this 90-minute pilot. Whereas when he does that in his other things, I kind of go with it. But with Mulholland Drive, I kind of call BS on it, to be honest.
Yeah. I'm never sure. I mean, I don't think I've seen a Lynch film I didn't like, but what really tells is the ones you want to watch again, And I want to watch Eraserhead and Elephant Man and Jude and I like, I'll watch his first 5 or 6 sort of main films again and again, whereas the later ones not so much.
Yeah, I mean, Inland Empire, I think is a tough watch,
I haven't seen.
he's a true experiment.
Right.
And I mean, for me, everything up to and including the Straight Story was a great run. But after that, I think he was more interested in purely experimenting with films, and I find the stuff that he's done after that interesting. But I haven't sat down and watched Inland Empire since I first saw it when it came out. Although I did take stuff from it, and I enjoyed the experience of watching the film. But I feel like I've had that experience now.
Yeah. It's not. I haven't seen it, so I'm going to shut up because I haven't seen it. Let's get back to the pilot. It was interesting watching the pilot and then watching episode 1, because the pilot, some of the actresses and actors, in fact, look quite radically different. Actually,
yeah, there's different haircuts, isn't there?
Yeah, Audrey looks she looks significant. I know it's only a year or so, but she looks significantly older because her hairstyle doesn't look like she looks like one of the Beatles almost in the first one.
Yeah,
it's got that cut.
And a lot of the girls they were like 19 years old when they were casting the roles, and at that age, people change a lot in a year, don't they?
Yeah, they do. There was one interesting aside that a few of the came out a few times in the commentaries with different people, which was there was a comment such as it's lucky that they used an actress for Laura Palmer, because then they could use Maddie. It was like Maddie was never planned, for example, when the pilot was made. So Cheryl Lee could have been a model or something, but she wasn't. She was an actress, so it plugged in. So it kind of makes it gives me more insight into it. They weren't really they hadn't got a clear plan at all at the pilot. They just had all these ideas and put them together. There was a plan for the pilot. It's coherent in and of itself, I think.
Well, I think that it's interesting, because if you look at the things that people primarily talk about with Twin Peaks, they are all there in the pilot. I mean, first of all, you've got the central mystery of who killed Laura Palmer, which is kind of what drove the series. And it's funny because now, when look at shows like True Detective and the Fargo series, which are kind of season-long, almost mini-series, you'll get a completely different story, and often, in a lot of cases, different characters each season.
Yeah.
It's as though now we've only just found the perfect TV series structure that would have suited Twin Peaks. Because I remember first seeing because Twin Peaks was on when it was first on in the UK. It was on Friday nights on BBC Two. And I remember seeing the trailer for it, and I remember in the 80s, the big thing was miniseries. You'd get these things, for example, everything from, Roots to Jackie Collins novels, and, The Winds of War, Hollywood Wives, all these things. And there'd be basically, V as well. There'd usually be 3 or 4 90-minute episodes that would run over, a long weekend. And it would essentially be a 10-hour movie.
Yeah.
And they were very glitzy, very glam, and they're very soap operatic. And that was a form of a very, very popular form of storytelling and then you had obviously the traditional soap opera. You had your Dallas, your Dynasty, what they're called, the late night soaps. And then you had your drama TV shows, which would be everything, from Hill Street Blues and Cagney and Lacey, the cop shows, through to, family shows like the A-Team and things like this, where it was very standalone. Even, I suppose, Star Trek: The Next Generation, where you'd have, a 3-act structure and at the beginning of it. And when I first saw the trailer for Twin Peaks, I was like, well, okay, well, this is clearly a miniseries. I jumped to that conclusion because it was David Lynch, and because it was a murder mystery. I was like, well, you can't sustain a murder mystery for 22 episode seasons over 5 or 6, 7 years, And I think that I get the impression that people were so blown away by the quirkiness of the pitch that Lynch and Frost did to the network, that nobody really thought it through.
Yeah.
They knew that they had this 8 episode first season. And I think that Lynch has said, and Mark Frost has said, that the intention always was that they were never going to explain who killed Laura Palmer. That was just going to be the into this sort of Peyton Place-esque world where you were then going to dig deeper and find out that everybody has a secret. That was the core idea of the show. And weirdly enough, the guy, do you know who it was that fucked them over on this? I didn't realise it until recently. It was Bob Iger, who now runs Disney and is running all the Star Wars movies. He was the guy who basically killed Twin Peaks. So think about that, Star Wars fans. This is the guy running your favourite franchise at the moment. He basically said, look, you've got to reveal it. And, we'll probably get into, we'll certainly get into this when we talk about the second series. But so you've got that. That's the one element you've got there is this central mystery. You've got the intentional, otherwise the satirical elements, the fact that they're mocking the concept of the soap opera. I mean, this all comes to a head with the cliffhanger of the last episode of the first season, which was written and directed by Mark Frost, where if you watch it, and this was intentional, every single scene is a cliffhanger.
He just jammed them in, didn't he? Just jammed them in.
Yeah. To the point where, part of it was probably just a business thing. We want people to come back. But there's a satirical element there where it's it's cliffhangering to the nth degree almost.
He specifically said that in the Wrapped in Plastic interview that was on the end of the sort of the extras that I'd mentioned. So yes, I kind of think that last episode is so wonderful because of that. It's just amazing.
It's absurd. The similar moment is, I'll just mention this very briefly because it's in the final ever episode, but Lynch once spoke about how one of the things that he finds beautiful about the soap opera is that it resists closure. It's a circular storyline. And I think a wonderful example of that is that there's this subplot in the second season with Catherine Martell's brother, Josie's ex-husband, and Pete, and there's this ongoing mystery where they find an envelope, and then they find a key to a safety deposit box, and then they find the safety deposit box, and then when they open the safety deposit box, it explodes. Yeah. And it's like that's kind of a metaphor for it, is the fact that it's a mystery within a mystery and within a mystery that's resisting closure. And do we really want to know? It's the J.J. Abrams thing. Do we really know what's going to be in the box? And then they finally open the box. The only logical conclusion is for just the world to explode. At that point.
Nice. You did mention that TV shows have really only recently come to the fore and learnt the structure from Twin Peaks, but there is one exception to that that's just occurred to me. In the I think it was mid-90s. It is not much talked about, and I'm not sure even if
I know. Can I guess what this is? This is? Yeah. Is American Gothic?
No. Oh. It's Murder One, a show called Murder One.
Of course, the Stephen Bochco series. Yeah,
that has got a very clean, coherent line through it, and you can't go in episode 3 and just pick it up. You got to watch it from the beginning.
The funny thing about Murder One, though, is that you'll see because you've got that first season, which, as you say, it's a season-long story arc where you follow every element of the trial and the investigation. But you'll notice in about the first 4 or 5 episodes, they try and squeeze in these kind of story of the week elements. Blood is the one with the black boyfriend and his little trial, and that goes out the window. And I'll tell you, I will put down 50 quid now to say that was a concession to the network, because the network were getting edgy and saying, I don't know about this season-long story arc thing. I don't know whether somebody's. But you're quite right. That is a great example.
But it did take a long time for it to become a bit more, normalised, as it were. But that is a great example that often gets forgotten in these discussions, I think. Now, to me, the obvious standout in the whole lot in terms of characters, to me, and I'm sure to you actually, is Cooper. I think, going back and thinking about when it was on, people were talking about the weirdness a lot, but they were also talking about almost like the sound bites or the visual bites, of him drinking his coffee and relishing it, and all those little things were part of its really central appeal. And I think a lot of its other appeal was some of the characters. I think the fact there was lots of quite beautiful women in it. That helped a lot. Really, nice to look at women.
Well, it's tight sweaters and smoking. I mean, that's the other thing as well that blows my mind.
And that music kind of...
Everyone smoked in the show.
Yeah, it's really cool. I felt there were some of the male characters kind of weren't great. James in particular, which I think most people will not.
I've got to defend that character because I think that James was a character that some of the writers and directors knew how to use, and some of them didn't, because Lynch was once asked, and he's answered this question differently. And I suspect he was partially playing devil's advocate here, but I kind of understand what he was saying. He was once asked what his favourite scene in Twin Peaks was. This is in the Lynch book. And he said it's a scene that a lot of people hate. I've always loved this scene, and to me, this scene sums up what Twin Peaks is. But it's a scene where James and Maddie and Donna are sitting around with a guitar singing.
Yeah.
And they're singing this song like it's a real kind of like doo-woppy kind of, a really almost comedically high-pitched voice as well. And Lynch said, to me, that's what Twin Peaks is. It's teenagers hanging around in the living room singing. And I think that the characters of James and Donna were part of this construction. I mean, you've got the cop elements of it, you've got the gothic detection elements of it, you've got the soap operatic elements of it, but you've also got 50s rock and roll movies in there as well. And I think that the characters of James was obviously meant to be, a James Dean kind of a character. So was Bobby Briggs.
Yeah.
And I think that when Lynch used those characters, they worked because they were satirical to a certain extent. They were kind of soppy. They were straight out of the posters of those, Teens Gone Wild kind of movies from the drive-ins from the late 50s. And I think that when Lynch used those characters, there was a kind of uncomfortable sort of beauty to that. But I think that the things that make those characters entertaining from a satirical point of view also are what makes them incredibly irritating when they're not used properly,
Yes.
And I think that when you go back and watch it now, and you see James in the pilot and in those early Lynch episodes, it's very difficult, I should say, to not separate that character from just what a whinging little pussy he is, basically, in the later episodes. And if you do watch those early episodes and just think about the way that the characters presented in those, it does really work. And the scenes between him and Donna, professing their love for each other, are fantastic in a kind of awkward teenagers who exist out of it. Because, the weirdness we spoke of about the pilot isn't that some of the characters are weird. It's that some of the characters aren't, and the two interact with each other.
Yeah.
And you've got some characters who do seem kind of real world, but then they'll be brushing up against characters that are 50s teen movie cliches. And I think that those elements, when they're not handled properly, are bad. But yeah, I've always defended those teen characters, particularly like the James and the Bobby and stuff, because I feel that when they're used right, they are a very important part of the tone and the aesthetic of the show. But boy, when they're used badly, it's brutal. I'll give you that.
Yeah, it never occurred to me before. You mentioned them being archetypes from sort of 50s characters. Bobby Briggs he's almost channeling bits of James Dean straight out of Rebel Without a Cause in some of his and James is channeling the more weedy bits of James Dean from that film too. So
James is like also in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, there was a real love for those times. If you look at like John Waters movies, Cry Baby, and films around that era as well, there was this sort of idealized view of the sensitive biker kind of character. And James very much wistfully sitting next to their bike, sort of thinking of love lost and all this kind of stuff. I think that there was a bit of a zeitgeist thing with that figure in the late 80s, early 90s as well.
It also occurred to me another character. I'm trying to think. Some of the most normal characters to me are Ed and Norma, actually. And the interactions with Nadine of both of them are kind of priceless. It's all in the eye acting. Ed's just aghast when Nadine's sort of saying various things, and Norma is too when she encounters Nadine. It's kind of
they're
hilariously
sort of
cringy.
Those sort of characters are kind of like surrogates for the audience, I think, to a certain extent, is that there are moments where they, and it's odd to see that in the Lynch episodes, because it does show that to a certain extent he was self-aware about the weirdness of these things.
Yeah.
Because there are moments where it almost breaks the fourth wall. The characters almost kind of look up and are like,
Yeah.
oh my goodness. But it's not the weirdness, it's the lack of observation, it's the lack of commenting on the weirdness, the fact that it's accepted, that just that sort of adds to that particular sort of surrealism of it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the key ones to me for weirdness happening and no one coming is the fish in the coffee moment where he says they might, and no one really says anything about it. It's like hilarious. I think, to me, probably the weakest character of all is Mike, actually, Bobby's friend Mike. I think that actor didn't have the charisma that the rest. I mean, everyone's very charismatic in this show. You can kind of see they've picked people for charisma and the way they look. And Mike is the one who just doesn't quite have it.
The one that's never really worked for me is the actor who plays Leo.
Right.
Eric DeRay, because his mother was the casting director.
Right.
Which makes me wonder.
Work. In the pilot, he's just terrible, I think. He's not... To me, in the pilot, I think, you're kidding, Bobby would kick his ass around the room. But he kind of improved, I think, after the pilot.
Yeah, I mean, again, I almost feel that to the point where, I mean, the stuff that he's shouting at Shelley, the kind of, I want a clean house. And all this, I mean, it's cliche to the point where I don't know whether Lynch was trying to do something ironic with the character that just went over my head. Yeah. But I just don't find the actor convincing in that role. And if that was the point, then I'll throw my hands up and just say that completely went over my head.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to tell. He does seem almost the stock character. I think everyone else is kind of archetypes, but he's a stereotype kind of thing. Yeah. That's kind of how it feels. Okay, let's move on to I mean, the show was kind of hit its stride from the get-go in terms of the public being aware of it. I think.
Oh, it was a phenomena by the second episode.
By the end of the second episode.
You mentioned the catchphrase is the damn fine coffee. I mean, I remember 2 weeks after the show had started, I went into a coffee shop in Solihull, where I was in college at the time, and they were doing offers on cherry pie with black coffee. I mean, it was full on cultural phenomenon. I mean, it was the first time I'd ever heard the phrase water cooler television. I've never heard that phrase before. I'm not saying that this created that phrase. It was just the fact that it was the first time I heard that phrase and I understood it. I mean, by the time the show came out in the UK, it had already been on for a couple of months in the States. Yeah. And so we already had heard about this. The merchandising started to trickle down. The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer had come out. And I remember going into college the week after the first episode was on. And I remember it started in the summer over here. And I remember sitting out on the grass at the back of the college, and every other person was reading The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer. It was just pretty inescapable.
Yeah, it was on a Thursday night, if I remember rightly, at 9 o'clock, something like that.
I think it was on a Friday, and then they moved it to Thursdays, because I remember I always remember it was after Food and Drink. And I remember Food and Drink one week did teaching you how to make cherry pie.
Nice.
And it led into, and that's kind of the way. I mean, I remember with Who Shot JR and stuff. And in the early '80s, and Dallas would always be on after Wogan, and Wogan would sort of be kind of like a hype man for the fact that Dallas was on afterwards, and it's kind of the good old days of terrestrial television where you'd get people would be talking about their excitement for a TV show on TV before the episode airs.
I mean, Twin Peaks was referenced on TV all the time by loads of different people, wasn't it? When it was on, it was just on British TV. I'm talking about.
I remember on Whose Line Is It Anyway? They did they had to do. I remember them having to do Shakespeare in the style of Twin Peaks. In America, nice. It was they had Carl McLachlan was on hosting Saturday Night Live, and they did loads of Twin Peaks skits on that.
I've heard of these. I've never seen any, but they sound kind of awesome. Where isn't there a skit where Carl McLaughlin's on and basically someone's admitting to being the killer and he's saying,
it's Leo, and he's like, oh yes, yeah, like he's got photographs of him doing the murder, and he's like, no, that's too obvious.
Yeah. I do remember Harry Enfield show at the end of it, Leon Lance going, what's that Twin Peaks about? It's just like a weird soap opera. What the bloody hell's that all about? It was kind of, that makes me laugh.
I mean that's what's funny about how when you see the early episodes after, I mean, first things first, the second episode, the first 1 hour episode, wasn't directed by David Lynch.
It was Dwayne Dunham. Yes,
who was he actually started off working for George Lucas. He came out of Lucasfilm.
Yeah.
And he filmed all of the original Star Wars making of documentaries that came out in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
And that's interesting as well, is who they got to work with them as well, because they got like Tim Hunter, they got Leslie Lincoln Glatter, they got a lot of essentially young American independent filmmakers. And obviously this was when you look at American independent film in the 90s, basically it was before Reservoir Dogs and after Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah.
And this was before Reservoir Dogs. And I think it's interesting the fact that when you see interviews with people like Dwayne Dunham and Caleb Deschanel and all these people talking about how the first season of Twin Peaks specifically felt like a kind of lunatics have taken over the asylum scenario.
Yes.
But all of these people who not only had no urge to work in television, but would never have been allowed to work in TV. Frost and Lynch were basically given, carte blanche to do whatever they want. They had final cut.
Yeah.
And they basically said to all their mates, come down. And they were all visiting them when they were shooting the pilot and were like, well, this is great, but it's never going to go to series, And then we went to series. And Lynch and Frost basically called all their friends in. And if you watch behind-the-scenes footage of the first series of Twin Peaks, there's just this sense of absolute joy and freedom.
Yeah.
You can see these filmmakers just, how they were all basically getting, and they got to edit their own episodes and have final cut. And they were getting to make an independent movie, each week, essentially.
Cool. I mean, all of them, without exception in the audio commentaries say they basically were free to do it. Their only constraining thing was time. Everything else was kind of fun.
I mean, there was the censorship, obviously, of network television as far as like content goes.
Yeah.
But as far as anything else goes, it was just bring it in on time and do
I mean the color palette and so on and so on. Apart from there is a mention again, a few of them. They mentioned that David Lynch stresses the inside locations got to appear warm and outside, which I guess they didn't film anyway, were cold, so they had to make it feel kind of warm.
You can see that. I mean, you can also see that there was an effort made in the first two episodes to continue to be as inclusive as possible with audiences. Like, for example, you've got that famous opening scene in the first 1 hour episode where the camera's panning down Cooper upside down, and that scene, like the wonderful scene in the pilot where he's talking to Diane and he's jumping all over the place talking about the crime, about the trees, about the food that he's eaten. You get a kind of microcosmic view of the character. And in the scene of him upside down, as well as a similar one, you get a little expositional moment. You get him talking about, who pulled the trigger on JFK and all that kind of stuff. So again, everything you kind of need to know about the characters there. You get a repeat of the damn fine coffee in the scene, the sort of flirtatious scene between him and Audrey. And then again, obviously in the third episode, you get the throwing rocks in the woods scene, which doubles up as Lynch having fun, just being weird, an insight into Cooper talking about his Tibetan view, unlocking the subconscious. But also, clearly what had happened was the network said, look, you need to remind the audience who all of these people are in order to be as inclusive as possible. And Lynch just thought, well, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to have as much fun as possible. And it resulted, what was essentially a mechanical necessity in the storytelling of the series, resulted in one of the weirdest and most entertaining scenes in the entire series. Necessity really is the mother of invention.
I mean, in episode 1, the one after the pilot, they are, as you said, they kind of introduced that there is that microcosm, like you say, of him talking about JFK and gravity booze and things like that. Recapping the fact he's talking to Diane. There's the thing between Audrey and Cooper's kind of set up, isn't it? As a dynamic, which never pays off, which is good. Is good in this. Which he actually asked him, "Do your palms ever itch?" Which kind of. I'm not quite sure what to make of that phrase. I think I know what it means, but and of course they're setting up Leo as the red hair, as the MacGuffin, aren't they? Really, right from the get go, bloody shirt, and stuff like that. It's kind of cool. Yeah, it was really the first 2 episodes after the pilot really sealed Twin Peaks in kind of in TV history, didn't it? It's kind of everyone was talking about that end of the second
I think
one.
the other thing as well is that what they by having slightly more televisual limitations than the pilot, obviously less budget, the fact that it's shot indoors, it's not it's not directed by David Lynch. I think that the one thing that the second episode does very well and was important at that time was it televisionizes Twin Peaks a little bit. I can imagine the network watching the pilot and thinking, well, that's a great film, but what's this show going to be on a weekly basis? Because if you look at the pilot, I mean, the central character doesn't even appear until 40 minutes in virtually. Cooper doesn't appear until you're almost one episode of TV's length in. So I think that what Dunham succeeds in very well with the first episode is televisionizing the view that Lynch had got, but also demonstrating that this can function as a TV show, but also by keeping the elements, and also most importantly, I think because there was a gap between the pilot and the TV show, it gave them time to reflect on what was successful in that first episode. And I think that they show pretty good judgment, because sometimes with TV shows, Moonlighting, Miami Vice, Twin Peaks in its second season to a certain extent are good examples of this. But your enemy sometimes with television is having too much time to overthink what it is that's working.
Yeah.
As opposed to just doing that thing. And I think that that Dwayne Dunham establishes a nice balance with that first episode.
Yeah. I listened to some of the commentaries and reading a little about it. I was some of the influences to David Lynch on Twin Peaks sort of came through things I didn't know. There's quite a few times it's mentioned in the commentaries that they took as their name, for names they were sort of dredging through noir,
Waldo Lydecker and
and I wasn't aware of that. That was kind of an interesting thing. And I actually also watched a film that I heard was an inspiration to Twin Peaks, and that is a film. I think it was 62. It was made, directed by Blake Edwards. Of all people, made Pink Panther. It's called Experiment in Terror. It's got a young Lee Remick, and I've never seen this actor in anything else apart from this film, and he used to be the sidekick in a show that was on in the 70s called The Wild Wild West.
Yes.
He was like a doctor stroke sidekick, and he plays the bad guy in it. And it's a film that veers between weird, creepy, mad stuff, and that includes saxophone music by Henry Mancini, so you can imagine that's a bit quite like Badalamenti stuff. She lives in a sort of village, I think it's New York, just outside New York, called Twin Peaks. He's got this creepy, weird, raspy voice like this, and he's got sort of asthma as well. and she's got a cute sister who gets threatened and told to strip down, and she looks quite a lot like Audrey. And it goes on. You need to try and watch it if you've not seen it.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I remember when the show started, it was, again, this was pre-internet, but I do remember people looking for Easter eggs. The fact that characters from Rebecca, Vertigo. There were a lot of characters from Hitchcock films and noir movies, as you say, that would go on whose names would be used in Twin Peaks. And obviously, when Madeline appeared, people were making allusions to Vertigo. The blonde between the brunette. But what was funny about that and I don't know whether it was intentional. If it was, Lynch has got a very, very dark sense of humor. Although I guess we know he has that anyway. It was almost as though he was just fucking with people when he did that.
Yeah,
because people were looking forward. They were like, oh well. In that, this character's got the same name as this character from Vertigo. You've got the blonde becoming the brunette. Does that mean that Laura's not really dead and that Madeline is dead? So people were kind of assigning all of these filmic comparisons to the actual narrative as well. But that's one I've never heard of before. I'm going to have to check that out.
Yeah, it's definitely worth checking out. Even if you just hear the theme, you'll think, that's Twin Peaks. You just have to hear the theme, and I think the theme's on YouTube. The film isn't. I can't remember how I got to see it in the end. I think I found it on one of like TCM one day and taped it or something like that. I haven't got it anymore though. But I think, to me, episode 2, we've got all the. What's the main elements of episode 2? Apart from the obvious important end, the end point in the Red Room. There's all sorts of fun going on with. In the episode before you get to that, which really, you sat up and thought, what the fuck? When they were, when they're eating the sandwich, eating the sandwich, the baguette.
Well, the sort of the fetishizing of food is hilarious.
Yes.
The
Albert in this, Albert gets introduced.
I mean, that's the thing is that was great about when I saw Twin Peaks in Battersea was it's really easy to forget how hilarious Twin Peaks is. I mean, it's the comedy works as well as comedy in any straightforward comedy I've ever seen. And the horror works as well. I mean, it kind of feels reductive to say that. Almost like it's got a little something for everyone. I don't mean it on that level because the diversity of it from a genre point of view is probably actually alienating as much as anything. But I mean, like the opening scenes with Albert, like from Miguel Ferrer's deadpan delivery, watching Michael Onkian's sort of slight blood boiling, and Cooper just grinning and smiling at him is absolutely wonderful. And places that they go with him later is the fact that it almost feels that the star of the show is the town.
Yeah.
And this conceit that Lynch had that Laura Palmer was just an in into the town makes so much sense because in the early episodes, it almost feels like a sketch show. There's these moments where the scenes are like these. They've got a beginning, middle, and an end, and some of them have an accumulative effect to the storyline. Some scenes are actually kind of retconned to have later have significance that
some just fade off, don't they? They just
Don't some of them are like the whole. The Drake Runners, for example, I get the impression that was just designed to be an amusing character moment. Audiences responded to it. And I think it's really important as well. I mean, you touched on this earlier, is Twin Peaks isn't an auteur show at all. There was a lot of writers. There was a lot of producers on the show. It wasn't just Lynch and Frost. And I think that it wasn't organic. The storyline did snowball and did build upon itself. So I think it's really important when you're watching Twin Peaks to not necessarily be too reverent, to not necessarily attach too much narrative importance to things, because you can see that a lot of things were retroactively assigned meaning because it was useful to a writer 6 months down the line to do that.
Yeah, Twin Peaks always feels to me like it was in. No, I'm not going to use the word inspired. It's a like a group effort galvanised by one, possibly two individual. I think Mark Frost is very important too, but they just saw what. I think people that worked on it saw what Lynch was doing and thought, I want to be part of this. I want to sort of carry on with this. This is awesome, kind of thing. That's how it kind of feels to me. I just think episode 2, to me, from the start, I think it starts with Audrey dancing. That's a great scene in and of itself. Just it's it doesn't really serve anything, but it's just there, and it's kind of fantastic.
Very pure cinema, isn't it?
Yeah. Right to the end, episode 2 to me is the best TV episode ever of anything. It's just such a great episode.
Well, it was the. I mean, it's particularly looking at the end, the famous dream sequence, the repurposed footage from the European pilot was without a doubt the craziest thing that had ever been on American network television when it aired. No question.
Yeah. Yes, I agree, and I think that repurposed stuff just fits perfectly there. It fits better there than it does in the pilot, the European pilot. To me, it just feels so perfect.
All great TV shows have a moment where you realise that what you're watching has a greater potential than the sum of its parts. I mean, another example of that would be. It seems like a trivial comparison, but for example, in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, there's a moment in the second season where a character has a very big
personal change. And that's a moment where, when you're watching the show, you're like, oh, okay, you're going to go there. And I think a lot of great shows have that moment where they open out. And I think that this was that moment for Twin Peaks where it went from being a show which was, quirky in the way that a lot of pretenders after it would be, whether it be, Erie, Indiana, Picket Fences, Northern Exposure, Wild Palms, all of these shows. But that moment at the end of that episode was kind of like, no, we are not fucking around here. This isn't this isn't water cooler quirk. This is something completely different. And I remember seeing that episode, and that was a moment where it went to another level. That was every single line of dialogue in that scene, that gum you like is going to come back in style. All of these things were assigned massive potential meaning and importance by fans of the show, and kind of unpacked to this day,
Yeah, I mean, I went through all that too, trying to work out all these things, but now I just let it wash over me. I think I'm attuned more to Lynch, and just have it, and that's it.
The only meaning is that it's how it makes you feel when you watch it, I think, really.
All right. So with episode 2, everyone was kind of hyped up and like couldn't wait for because he ends it with "I know who did it." Yeah. So everyone's sort of key.
No, it can wait until the
yes, it can. So episode 3, I think, continues it doesn't feel a deflation, but it isn't like we obviously ramped up massive. You feeling you've just been shot out of a cannon almost once you watch episode 2. Episode 3 doesn't feel like you've hit the earth yet, but it certainly feels like it's continuing, but it's not. You're not, speeding up or anything. I kind of enjoy episode 3 quite a lot still, but I think episode 2 was the bit where it was a sort of a gut punch to people.
I almost feel like you've got those first 3 episodes, which I sort of see as their own thing. You've got the pilot, you've got the second episode, which just feels very different because it's an episode of television, and you've got the third episode because it's just so crazy. I kind of view the rest of the first season almost as just this one thing. I don't massively differentiate between those episodes. Obviously you've got the last episode, which is crazy, but really from then on, it feels to me like the rest of the first series is spending more time with the lesser characters. Not the lesser characters, that's unfair, but the characters who aren't necessarily seemingly at first central to the mystery, and really kind of you get to spend a little bit more time with like Norma and Nadine and these sort of characters, and then like characters like Hank are brought into the series, but there's this slow kind of escalation of the investigation as well. So I don't. In a weird way, I almost don't differentiate those after the first 3 episodes. Any of those rest of those episodes from the first series.
I can kind of see that. It's almost like a roller coaster, isn't it? Like that episode 2 is like you going over, knowing what's coming. 3 continues it, then it kind of feels calm, and then you're starting to go up again in the number 7, the end of the season, and it kind of feels like that, and it's kind of cool. There are some great moments though. Apparently in this one, Albert doing the autopsy, they had real trouble with that scene because Miguel Ferrer was too gleefully revving that saw, and just making everyone on set crack up, which I would too. It's super funny. It always strikes me, and again in the reading the commentary, Lynch is obviously using Cooper as a sort of cipher of himself. There's a lot of
Jimmy Stewart from Mars. That's
Mel Brooks called it, didn't he? Yes. I kind of agree. We get there's some interesting sort of points in the series. We're obviously finding out more. Everything's pointing towards Leo and Jacques Renault somewhat, and Leo's being set up. The only really standouts for me. There are a few different standouts, but I really think Ray Wise is fantastic.
Yeah.
Anything with him, any scene with him in, you could, the tension and the pain and the sort of agony, his face says it all, and his body language.
When it was decided by Lynch and Frost that it was Leland, I think that was a great decision, not just narratively, but also from a kind of an assets point of view, because Ray Wise can do anything.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a fun couple of episodes in the second series when he gets to really take his foot off the brakes and show you what he can do. I mean, there's the one episode where, because there's one episode in the second series that people always forget about because it's between the two big episodes. You've got the episode with Maddie dying, then you've got the episode of Leland kind of just Leland's wild ride, just him driving around with a body in the
with it, and
then you've got the episode after that, which is essentially the final episode of the Laura Palmer storyline.
Yeah.
But basically, in that middle episode, you've essentially got Ray Wise playing the Joker.
Man, he is fantastic. I remember him, singing Maisie Dotes and Tosie Dotes in a manic way. Awesome. Absolutely awesome. Yeah, and he is very Joker-like. And again, he in Fire Walk with Me, the movie Fire Walk with Me, he's phenomenal. He really is.
It's funny as well because he talks about how he when we spoke to him for Cheers Roker vs Punter, he was saying that he just had a kid when he filmed Twin Peaks and how difficult it was for him when he found out that the nature of his relationship with Laura, to the point where he was actually angry about it and wouldn't talk to the Lynch or Frost for a few days because he was like, I didn't sign up to play a paedophile,
Yeah, I've had discussions with other people that sort of say, well, Bob didn't exist because that was just a sublimation of this horrible thing happening to Laura Palmer, sort of. And Leland sort of distancing, but so this was all a construct. And I would say no. There's definite. You can clearly see Bob's real because of this, and this.
Well,
it's still a point of view.
The thing with that is that in a lot of ways that's kind of central to viewing Twin Peaks. And I don't necessarily just mean that narratively, because the conversation that they have at the end of the, I think the 7th or 8th or whatever it is episode of the second season, where Albert's like, is Bob real? That's quite funny because David Lynch's surrealism is mysterious because it doesn't give you a clear narrative explanation of everything. But it's different to, say, the J.J. Abrams mystery box mystery, where there is meant to be an answer. You as the audience just don't know what it is, and the excitement comes in the slow realization of what that answer is.
Yeah.
I don't think David Lynch ever really, when he has these surreal moments of mystery, means there to be a literal explanation for that. I think that when he showed Bob in the mirror in that episode of the second season, he wasn't intending there to be a definitive answer to that question. Is he possessed? Is he the evil that men do? Is he just a reflection? Is it purely just metaphorical art movie wankery, And I think that what's funny is that the series, in the episodes that aren't made by Lynch, and the audience are constantly trying to answer these questions, but the tension there is that there isn't an answer. The answer is whatever the writer of the episode you're watching at any one time's view of that ambiguity is, It is. So you could say, well, no, Bob's clearly real because in this episode this happens. You say, well, okay, then in the opinion of the person who wrote and directed that episode, their view of this ambiguity is that, So it's it's a tricky thing, and I think that discussion is kind of a microcosm for the series. But anyway, sorry, I derailed you. You were talking about series one.
Oh, that's all right. To me, the whole beauty of Twin Peaks is kind of. So I don't know why I think of this, but summed up in a line from the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory film, which was, the tension's unbearable. I hope it lasts. That's what Twin Peaks, the beauty of Twin Peaks is. And when you get answers, it's like Maddie Hayes and David Addison sleeping together. That sort of resolution ruins things.
Mystery is a beautiful thing. I mean, the other line as well that I think this was actually used in the marketing as well was Donna's. It's like the most beautiful dream and the most terrible nightmare.
Yeah. When
she's talking about her relationship with James, I think that was a tagline for a while. I mean, one of my favourite taglines was, I remember UK Gold. I think it was either UK Gold or the Sci-Fi Channel. Somebody in the mid-90s bought the first season of Twin Peaks, and they had these bus adverts, and they had to get pulled because they were just black with the white tiling that you get on the floor and the outline of a cup of coffee, and it was just murder, mystery, rape, incest, and damn fine coffee. That was, and it was out for about a week. He's like, I'd love to track down one of those posters because they got yanked.
That'd be an awesome poster. Yes, nice one. Yeah, so I'm gonna sort of skip. I think we've kind of covered.
Yeah, I'm getting increasingly pressed for time at the moment. I'm afraid,
Okay,
mate, so we
no
might need to sort of truck through that.
Well, let's move on to episode 7. We kind of know the various plot lines are going on. You know, basically mystery's being piled on mystery. You know, there's double crossing, triple crossing. Some of there's just some wonderful actors in this. Piper Laurie's really fantastic, I think, as well.
Her and Ben Horne are very much, they're the conventional soap opera characters, aren't they? In a lot of ways,
to some degree.
The wheel and I don't mean that in a diminutive sense, because to me, for example, and I've always maintained this, one of my favourite ever character and actor combinations of all time is Larry Hagman's J.R. Ewing from Dallas. I honestly think that that's one of the greatest characters in modern, really? Not even pop culture, literature. I think that Larry Hagman's performance as J.R. Ewing in Dallas is absolutely fantastic. I get that, you know, Piper Laurie, you know, she's an Oscar-winning actress, isn't she? But her the nature of the schemes that her and Ben Horne are involved in, and the way that they get one over on characters and the way that they express themselves feel very Dallas and Dynasty to me.
Yeah, I kind of agree, but I also kind of see them as, you know, the show has all these a lot of duality, doesn't it? There's a pair of Mikes and Bobs, and there's these characters. You know, there's a bad girl, there's a good girl, and to me, I almost see them as the reflection of the fairly innocent relationship between James and Donna, and Catherine and Ben have got this. They're older, and they've got this. You know, it's almost entirely sex. I know it's business as well, but really for Catherine, it's the sex. You can kind of tell it's the sex, isn't it? And Ben's fine with that, obviously. But yeah, I sort of take your point. Series 1 is a fantastic series, and I think, to me, the through line is really Series 1 until about episode 6. Well, certainly episode 10 of Series 2, 16 in all. That is a really great series run there. And then I think the last 4 or 5 of Season 2 are its own little micro-series as well.
I think one of the benefits they had, I think that the short season was a great help for a lot of people who were very, you know, inexperienced in making network television. You know, the fact that I think it's the one thing that I always get when I hear behind the scenes, you know, the commentaries and documentaries about network TV shows is it's fucking punishing. Yeah. I mean, pulling the actors, all of the key cast and crew are pulling 12-hour days, 7 days a week. It's brutal work, and just getting the scripts out and getting their post-production done, all of that. You know, I think that they had the luxury. I mean, people now talk about how, you know, wonderful television is, but we're on HBO and Showtime and Netflix. But, you know, we're talking 10, 11, 12 episode seasons. You know, when you're going to make 25 of those motherfuckers a year, that is not, you know, it's going to be, I mean, people go, oh, the X-Files went on too long. It's like, look, I defy any of these, you know, hot shit writer-producers that do these HBO shows to do 25 episodes in 6 months on a show with the budget those shows had to work with. Yeah. You know, it's incredible that there was anything that even made sense, you know, come on the screen. And I think that with the first season of Twin Peaks, it was a beautiful sort of setup that they had. I think that there was the other thing that's really key is that I think that they were allowed to just get on with it. Yes. And they just did that. And I think that Mark Frost has said a number of times that when they got into the second series, the managing the success of the show was more work than the actual production. Right. The fact that they would constantly be having to dealing with people from, you know, entertainment magazines coming in and photographing people. The fact that suddenly, you know, everybody was thinking about how they replicate the success of the first series. There was a pressure, and there was they had people looking over their shoulders. All of these things were there but whereas the first season, I get the impression it felt like this wonderful vacation where they all went off and did these things. Yeah. And I think that's reflected. And I think that when you get into the second season, it's funny because, I mean, my favourite episodes of Twin Peaks, my favourite 3 or 4 episodes of Twin Peaks are all in the second season. I think really? I think there's some fantastic episodes in that second season, with possible exception of the pilot. but the lows are low. But we'll get to that. But I think that first run of 6 or 7 episodes in the second season, I think that they still had a lot in the tank. The first series, and I think that when it got to the point where halfway through that second series where they were like, okay, now we've just got to do this week in, week out, week in, I think the rot started to set in a little bit then. But in that first series, that's not there.
If I remember rightly, though, wasn't they expecting to only to do like 10 or 12, and it was extended out kind of out of the blues?
No. There was always an intention for there to be 22 episodes in the second season. The difference being there were about 5 episodes in when they were told that they had to close shut down the Laura Palmer storyline. So basically, there was about 3 or 4 episodes where they were just treading water whilst they mapped out a story arc for the second season. Yeah. Whereas they say that if they could have shut down for a month, around that they'd have still been on the air 5 years later probably.
Yeah. Okay, then I think we'll wrap it up there. But I'm hoping we'll come back and revisit I think probably the first 10. I think it's episode 16 or 17 of them overall. Basically, the Leland Laura sort of closure. Yep. I think it's 16 is a closure, but there's that one episode which is not bad where not much happens and sort of it's Cooper saying goodbye and stuff, which is sort of
and the Leland's funeral, isn't it?
Yeah, and stuff like that. So I'll intend our next show about Twin Peaks. I intend to be going out, and I'm hoping you can. I know you're off to New Zealand soon, but I'm hoping you can come on for that. That'd be great.
Yeah, sure.
We won't rush it though; it'll be quite a while. And if you can, try and get around to seeing Experiment in Terror. I'd be interested in what you think of it.
Yeah,
it's there are definite great sections, but there's lots of boring police procedural in it too. So
I've already found it on a torrent site on my mobile.
Nice.
And you should go back and listen to the Mark Frost Chinstrecker versus Brunter.
I will.
It's quite a surreal experience hearing Mark Frost hanging around with scumbags like us.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a real pleasure
to
have you on again. And if anyone listening hasn't heard it, if you go and look in our back catalogue for our Stephen King on Salem's Lot, Mike comes on that, and it's a great show too. Thank you very much. Bye from me, and
later.